Welcome back to Glasp Talk. Today we have amazing speaker, Dr. Richard Cytowic, a distinguished professor of neurology at George Washington University. And he's famous for having discovered synesthesia 40 years ago and brought it back into scientific mainstream in the face of dogmatic skepticism. And he won the Montaigne Medal for his book, Wednesday Is Indigo Blue. And also he is nominated to Pulitzer Prize in the past. And so today we'd like to ask him about what is synesthesia and also what's happening in the research and also digital distraction and also his new upcoming book, Stone Age Brain. So Dr. Richard, thank you for joining today.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
So first of all, I briefly introduced you, but could you introduce yourself a little bit to people who don't know you yet?
Well, I am a clinical professor of neurology at George Washington University. My interests have always been not basic things like seizures and multiple sclerosis and peripheral neuropathy, but what are called higher cortical functions. That is, the things that make us think and remember and feel. I remember I wrote a paper when I was a medical student about aphasia in Maurice Ravel. Aphasia is a loss of language. And when I first learned about that, I thought, oh my God, how diabolical. Somebody can make noises and move their tongue, but they can't speak. They can't understand. How awful is that? And so that paper won a prize but at the time, this was in the early 70s, the professors and my colleagues labeled me as, quote, philosophically minded, because at that point, language and memory and Alzheimer's disease had nothing to do with neurology. Nobody was interested in them. And I thought, well, my God, you're studying the brain. How could you not be interested in what the brain is doing to make us human beings? So I was always an outlier in that respect. And I continued to pursue higher cognitive functions. And that included I became interested in closed head trauma. That is, people who got hit in the head in auto accidents or fell down the steps or had boxes hit on them in the head or had sports injuries. And people would, they'd get a head x-ray or a neck x-ray or a CAT scan even back then, and everything was normal. So it was like, well, there's nothing wrong with you. And yet these people complained of all sorts of physical and cognitive problems. And I thought, well, you can't just say there's nothing wrong with you because the doctor can't see anything wrong. It's like our methods of looking at people are inadequate. And so I had trained in ophthalmology before I started in neurology. And so like people were seeing, they would complain about seeing all sorts of things and flashing lights and narrowed vision in the periphery. And so when we actually looked at them with appropriate methods, we found that they indeed had things like hairs in their retina that could be repaired by laser surgery. So that was another interesting episode in my life, is that, we just like, okay, there's nothing wrong with you. We're showing that, yes, indeed, there is something wrong with you. If only the doctors would learn how to look where they needed to look. And so let me fast forward to what I do today, which is mentor medical students at George Washington University. George Washington is one of my alma maters, and we teach what's called patient-centered medicine. So we never talk about a case of anything. There's never a patient who's a case of something. They are always an individual who has a particular problem that the student, needs to solve. So it's very patient-centered. So I guess I would say that that's my modus operandi, really, is forget what the establishment says, what the orthodoxy says. I mean, and this is the nature of orthodoxy. You know, when I first started with synesthesia, I mean, the establishment was quick to say, oh no, this can't possibly be real. This cannot possibly be a real brain phenomenon. Oh no, these people are just making it up. They just want attention. They're having residual hallucinations from their marijuana and LSD usage. And when all those excuses failed, they finally said, well, they're just being artistic. And in America, everybody knows that artists are just sort of slightly crazy. So that's why they're claiming to see all these things. But you know, it didn't take much. It didn't take $1 million machines to show that synesthetes experiences were real. You could show that they were real with paper and pencil tests, and with tests that had been around to study optical illusions and perception for a long, long time. So finally, but always the skeptics said that they wanted proof. They wanted a third person proof that of a first person experience, which meant technical pictures of the brain or scans. So finally, when they got the scans, they had to shut up because the scans showed that in fact the synesthetes did in fact experience color and in other aspects when they looked at letters and numbers or heard words, etc. So, and that's really sad in a way, because Michael Watson, my index patient, who was the man who tasted shapes, he had a degree in botany, so he understood the scientific method. And at one point, he became quite frightened that what I was doing was going to show that his experiences were bogus, fake. And I thought, oh my God, Michael, you know, you're willing to give up your first person individual experience for what the establishment is saying is fake. And so that was the argument that the skeptics wanted a third person technological verification of a first person experiment that is used by a machine. And of course, a machine's not going to say anything about what a person is experiencing. So of course, I'm very happy to say that that whole attitude has changed over the past decades. And synesthesia is now a very, very popular topic. Young people all around the world are writing about it, doing research about it. And I couldn't be happier. And particularly, I couldn't be happier for the individuals who are synesthetes. I can't tell you early on how often I had people writing and calling and emailing that said, oh my God, no, you're the first person who's ever believed me. No one has ever believed me in my entire life. You gave me my freedom. I've had grown men crying, saying, I can't believe this is real. Nobody ever accepted it. And for a researcher, for a scientist, to somebody say, you changed my life, it can't get any better than that. So I'm quite happy with my legacy in that regard.
Yes, it's really impressive work, and yes. And when confronting, like when facing the dogmatic skepticism, you know, you could, like many people, I think not only your case, but you know, many people facing like a difficulties, say people give up and sometimes, but you kept moving forward, right? What motivated you to do the research? Is
Well,
that like
I couldn't do otherwise. You know, it was first of all, the phenomenon of colored hearing and synesthesia, like, okay, people see colors when they hear music. People see colors when they read words or letters or numbers. It was like, how could you not be fascinated in that claim? So rather than saying, oh my God, this is ridiculous, this can't possibly be true, it's like, well, what's the harm in looking, in seeing what's behind this? And this was also something that surprised me, because when I mentioned my index case, Michael Watson, the man who tasted shapes, and I said, when he tastes something, he feels it on his face and in his hand. They said, well, what does his CAT scan show? And I said, no, you don't understand. He doesn't have a hole in his head. He doesn't have a lesion. He has something extra. And they looked at me like I was insane and said, oh man, you'd better stay away from this. This is too weird, too new age. It's going to ruin your career. And of course, I don't know what happened to them, but my career has been just fine. So I think the lesson there is that you just have to keep barking up the right tree, and look where the evidence follows, rather than saying, oh, this evidence is no good. We have to discount, we have to say no to this evidence. We have to discount this because this isn't consistent with our theories. And what's happened is that over the years, I have caused a paradigm shift in how we think the brain is organized. It used to be that we think there were these, 5 tubes that went from peripheral organs to the central brain, and that there was no mingling in between them. That was the orthodox theory of modularity that reigned in the 70s and 80s. And of course, we now know that that's completely wrong. And so, it's nice to have been a force that's caused our change in perspective to that. And the other thing is that people ask me, why you? Why did you believe these people when everybody else said they were crazy, making it up, etc.? And at first I thought it was because my father, who was a physician and a bon vivant and a raconteur and a magician and an archer, he was a larger than life personality. And he instilled in me a taste for the offbeat and the unusual. So at first I thought, well, that was just his influence. But then it took me actually quite a long time to realize that the actual reason was the fact that I'm gay, okay? And so that as a 10-year-old in New Jersey, my father's medical profession said that I was sick. The state of New Jersey said that I was a criminal. And the church said that I was doomed to hell. And I hadn't done anything. I was 10 years old, and I thought, what do these people know? They don't know me. They don't know anything about me. Who are they to make these kinds of judgments? So when I told people about Michael Watson, the man who tasted shapes, and said, oh, no, it can't be real, I thought, oh man, I have heard this before. And so it just gave me the fortitude to keep pushing forward.
I see. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, it's a yes. And so then I'm also interested in the research development in synesthesia recently, and I read your book, and it says, like synesthesia happens like a often case in childhood, and in research, how much do we know about synesthesia, the mechanism, how it emerged?
Well, we know an awful lot compared to when I first started out. So we know that, first of all, it's inherited very strongly and passes down from one generation to another. It is the genes that cause synesthesia are extremely common. 1 in 23 people carry the genes for synesthesia. Because they are not expressed with 100% accuracy, a smaller percentage of 1 in 90 has some kind of overt synesthesia. The most common kinds are perceiving the days of the week as colored. The next is colored graphemes, that is the written language, written elements of language, letters, numerals, punctuation signs, etc., are colored. And then from there on, they're less frequent kinds of synesthesia. So it's actually quite common in the population. And if that's the case, then the big question is why? This is when you ask what good is it, synesthetes say, well, it helps you remember. And when you test them, they have extraordinary memories. But other than that, synesthesia is a pretty thing to have. But what good does it do? And why is it maintained so high in the genetic database? And so I and a number of other people think that it's a gene for metaphor. So what is metaphor? Metaphor is seeing the similar in the dissimilar. And so if somebody says, I know it's two because it's white, well, there's something about two-ness and whiteness that's equivalent, and the synesthete experiences this. So if you have these genes being expressed in sensory areas of the brain, then you will get an overt synesthete, colored hearing, colored music, number forms, etc. But now what happens if these genes are expressed in non-sensory areas of the brain, such as the frontal lobes or executive areas or areas involved with memory? What do you get then? Do you get a madman or do you get a genius? And I think, and this is one of the outstanding questions, because a number of groups around the world have been searching for genetic markers for synesthesia, and they have found a number of them. And so eventually the hope is that once we get enough genetic markers to pinpoint the fact that a person who has this array of genetic markers is going to be a synesthete, then that will allow us to predict who is going to be a synesthete and what are they like. Because if they're not overtly synesthetic, then we can test, well, what are they like? What are they like in terms of personality, in terms of memory, in terms of this, that, and the other? And I think that's a very, very exciting thing. And that's going to be up for younger people to come up with.
Yes, it is really fascinating. And maybe this is a stupid question, maybe, but
there are no stupid questions.
Yes. So does synesthesia happens to other animals, or is this specific to humans?
Oh, well, of course, there's no way to answer that. Initially on the question was, is this an atavistic kind of trait? We know from studies with newborn mammals, guinea pigs, rats, cats, etc., that in fact there are connections among different sensory areas. And this is in keeping with research that Daphne Maurer at McMaster University in Ontario did, and it's brilliant and very, very difficult research, where she showed that newborns between 0 and 3 months are inherently synesthetic. So, and that they lose this ability after 3 months. So I think it's entirely reasonable to say that, well, young mammals may in fact have this capacity, whether they keep it, and we don't know what their conscious experience is. So we just can't say. But it is a fascinating question, and it would make sense because, of course, we're all related. We're all mammals. The Stone Age brain hasn't changed in its architecture in millennia, and every mammal that shares the blueprint for our brain has the same blueprint. And so it is shaped by its experience, by the creature's experience in the world. So to answer your question, yes, I mean, it's entirely plausible that they would be, but we have no way of knowing.
I see. Oh, thank you. Thank you for answering the question. and also I'm interested in like synesthesia and memory, that relationships. And in your book, you said for some people with synesthesis have like a good memory in some situations. And in research development, how much do we know about the relationship
Well,
between
all synesthetes have excellent memories. And in fact, when you ask them, well, what good is this beautiful but useless, obviously useless trait? They say, well, it helps you remember things, phone numbers, addresses, items on a shopping list, etc. I actually first learned of the word synesthesia by reading a very old book by A.R. Luria, the Soviet father of neuropsychology, called The Mind of a Mnemonist. And he described a memory expert who had a five-fold synesthesia, who could remember limitless amounts of information thanks to all these extra hooks that he had. And this guy, just named S, went on to become a stage performer as a memory expert.
I see. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
And so in the nowadays, so what is the research frontier in synesthesia, or any like what is a like a hot topic nowadays in this area?
Well, I think most people who are studying it around the world, they're limited by single case studies, an N of one. And then there's of course imaging studies, but the imaging studies, the fMRI, basically tells us what we already know from basic neuroanatomy, that when people who say they hear colors when they hear words, that the color area, the human color area of the brain, V4, activates. So that's not terribly exciting. I think what's really exciting and what's going to come in the future, and what I would like to come in the future, is a mapping down of the timeline between child development and what kind of synesthesia an individual has. Because really what's interesting is that you've got, for a child to have synesthesia, you've got to be born with a genetic propensity to hook different kinds of sensations together. But then you also must be exposed to cultural artifacts, just such as letters, numbers, the names of the foods that you eat, how to tell time on a clock, etc. What musical notes mean. And so we know from, oh my God, 60 years of like the Gazelle Institute of Child Study, we know exactly the timeline of when children learn certain things. And so if we can get, let's say, children of synesthetes who we suspect themselves might become synesthetes, if we can get them early enough and look at them and see, okay, how are their developmental milestones coming along? And is there an indication of when synesthesia develops? And when is there a time lock? Is there a time locked occurrence between the two? I think that would be very exciting. But again, it's going to be very, very difficult because it would depend on having children of synesthetes, newborns, being followed from their very earliest ages onwards. So that would be exciting, but very, very difficult.
I see.
But, people have never shied away from difficult problems before.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I'm curious, like, if you cannot share me, so let me know. So can you tell us about the challenges and benefits that people with synesthesia experience in their daily lives?
Well, first of all, it's a wonderful thing to have. They to lose it would be an odious state. They love having it. They just when you talk to them, it's astonishing because they'll describe a street name as delightful or a phone number as beautiful. I mean, these are mundane things, and yet they have such a exciting emotional reaction to them. But most of all, when you ask what good does it do, they will say, well, it helps you remember. And that's the main thing, is that it endows them with an exceptional memory. Some of them have an eidetic memory, or what's often called a photographic memory. So they can look at something and they can, like a book, or they can just simply read off the page what they've seen. So it definitely has a benefit in terms of that. And other than just being a beautiful, fuzzy, warm thing to have, it's not worth much. But again, the people who have it, they would never give it up for an instant. You know, and once you have it as a child, you never lose it all your life. It stays the same. I've had people in their 60s and 70s said, oh, now no, the colors shine as brightly as they ever did. So, and they love it. So what can you say? Is you can't deny human happiness.
Actually, and not only original people, but a lot of like artists, like the musicians, composers have like synesthesia, like.
Well, yes, it turns out, it turns out that we know many more famous artists who happen to be synesthetic than synesthetes who happen to be famous artists. That said, Catherine Mulvena has done research showing that indeed synesthetes as a group, as a whole, are more creative than non-synesthetes. That is, they speak a foreign language, they play a musical instrument, they're engaged in something like knitting, pottery, sculpture, archery, whatever. So yeah, and then of course, then the question is, well, are they more creative because they're synesthetic, or are they more synesthetic because they're creative? And it's a chicken and egg problem. But it is true that indeed, as a group, the synesthetes are indeed more creative than the rest of us. And this fits in with the metaphor hypothesis that if you accept the metaphor hypothesis of synesthesia, that it makes us more creative as a species, then synesthetes are proving this to be true, that they are more creative than the rest of us poor slobs who are not synesthetic.
Hypothesis. And so you touched the previous conversation like digital age and Stone Age brains. So you firstly you studied and researched like synesthesia, but now you are researching so Stone Age brain, so like digital destruction now.
Yes, I mean, because I was really struck by how my iPhone was such a distraction. For years, my husband and I had what are called track phones, which basically you could just make phone calls and that was it. And one day in New York, we were looking for an address, and by that time, all the phone booths had been ripped out of Manhattan. And we finally said, we've got to get an iPhone, if only for the maps. And so we got iPhones, and within days, I was just mesmerized by it. And I said, my God, no wonder everybody is so addicted to these things. And that's what led me to this whole notion of digital distractions and the Stone Age brain. So let me say, first of all, that the brain that you and I have now, resting comfortably in our heads, is no different than the brain that our ancestors had 3, 4, 5, 6 millennia ago. Brains just don't change that fast. But what has changed fast is culture. And so the question is, can culture live up to what it's putting on the brain? And my answer is no, it can't. Now, many people think that they can multitask. And Clifford Nass at Stanford University showed decades ago that no, you can't multitask. Even when he showed his young students how poor they were at multitasking, they didn't believe him. They discounted it. And they said, no, of course we can. Of course we can. And so they wouldn't believe the evidence in front of their eyes and said, no, we can multitask. We can multitask, even when faced with how awful they were doing. Now, let's move forward to today's era of smartphones. Oh, you know, almost everybody I talk to says, I'm addicted to my phone. I'm addicted to my phone. Well, why did they say that if that isn't true? There must be some truth to it. Why did they think that? And the Stone Age brain has a fixed amount of bandwidth for attention that no amount of Sudoku puzzles, diet, exercise, or you name it, is going to ever be able to change. You cannot change it. And so if you cannot change the amount of energy that's available for attention, then what are you going to do? And the answer is you're going to overwhelm it, and you're going to become confused, have fuzzy memory, brain fog, you name it. And so this is the issue of screens, is that we are so addicted and distracted by our screens today, iPhones, iPads, desktops, is that it's overwhelming the attention bandwidth that our brain has to give to it.
I see. And do you have some ideas? Maybe you wrote it in the book, upcoming book, but what do you think the people should live with screens in the future? Like, what is the best practice, or good way to not to distract it much and to be productive, effective on what they do?
Well, one is to understand that in fact you are addicted and to react appropriately, rather than be defensive and say, oh, no, I'm not addicted, I'm not addicted, I'm not addicted. So that would be to, and I guess the biggest thing would be to realize the importance of silence, nature, and real world interactions. I have a chapter called Silence is an essential nutrient, suggesting that we need quiet around us, not constant stimulation, Snapchat, streaks, winning thing, endless notifications, all these endless distractions. What the brain needs is quiet and time to think and contemplate, and also to interact with other human beings, not people on social media, because that's not interaction at all. That's just another distraction. So, and I think that this and this has been shown by recent research in which like schools in California are now banning smartphones from their classes, because they realize that to replace real human interaction leads to loneliness and social isolation. And this is really a corrosive effect in young children. It's causing depression and anxiety. And the simple solution is to take the devices away and learn how to talk to one another.
I see. And
so there is a profound mismatch between our ancient Stone Age brain architecture and the modern digital world. That means the digital world has hijacked our attention with all these digital distractions. And so the challenge is to navigate the screen age with a brain that has not evolved past its earliest roots.
I see. And at the same time, nowadays, AI technology is advanced and improving over time. So, and AI is creating new information, like sometimes false news, they hallucinate and so on. And but at the same, in the other hand, some people say in the new, like a new era with AI, the people who can leverage AI will do more. So do you have any thoughts around it? How to deal with AI or how we should adapt AI? I mean, in digital disruption age.
Well, I have used AI myself, ChatGPT, and I have to say it's amazing. I asked it to summarize my book, and it did so within 15 seconds and gave me all the highlights in it. So that's quite an achievement. Where we go from here, I don't know. AI is here, and we're going to have to deal with it. So the question is then, how do we deal with it while staying as humanistically based as we can be? So I think it's a question of looking at AI critically. Yes, it's a wonder. Yes, it's amazing. And then ask, well, so what? What is it doing? How is it benefiting me? Is it making my life richer, or is it just making me lazy because it beats me out to having to think about a certain problem? I think it's really important to have to struggle with certain problems and issues and think about them for yourself. So it comes down to the user and how the user regards AI as a tool or a replacement. And for me, I think of it as a tool. It's an incredible one. I admit that. But then I look at it skeptically, at its output skeptically, and think, okay, what's it come up with? Is this good or not? Because we know that it hallucinates and comes up with the wrong answers. So there always has to be a human being on the other end examining its output and saying, okay, is this useful? Is this true? Or is it not? So I don't think it will replace human beings. It can't replace human beings. When people talk about connecting the dots, well, that's fine. But if you don't know what dots are out there to connect, you're basically stupid. And this is what young people say, oh, I can just look anything up on Google. Well, but how do you know what to look up? If you don't know anything about the world, about history, about current events, etc., then how will you ever know what to look up? You can't unless you know something about the world you're living in. So it always takes a human being with context to be able to approach these tools.
I
but
totally
yeah.
agree.
I agree with it. Yes, that's also kind of message to like new researchers so in university. But I'm just curious, like in your daily life, so how much are you using AI? Yeah, just daily life.
Well, I've used it in the past to help me write a column for my Psychology Today column. And it's been okay. Things like, on oxymorons, etc. And I use it to summarize my book, the talking points. But that's about it. I'm very new to this, just as everybody else is. So I'm learning as we go along, and I'll just see how it goes. I mean, I'm open to seeing what it can do, and I think what it can do is incredible. But this is what I learned from somebody like Joanna Stern at the Wall Street Journal, who writes the technology column there, is like how to write good prompts for GPT. You have to learn how to ask it questions in the right way. And so that's another learning experience. So I think we're all in this together.
And I'm curious what you are interested in now in the future, and do you have some ideas you want to address or work on in the near future, or now, or working? Maybe you're cooking something interesting in the behind, but maybe.
What I'm interested in is my garden. I have 4 gardens on each side of the house, and I spend time in there every day, and I love digging in the dirt. So it's kind of a physical Buddhist meditation to be in the gardens. At my age, I've done enough. I've had my time. I did my thing. It's time for younger people to take over. I guess what I'm interested in is giving guidance and advice where I can to younger scientists, encouragement. There's really nothing else that I want to achieve. I'm quite happy with the books that I've written. Those are my legacies. And I'm extremely happy that I told orthodoxy to go fuck itself, and listen to what is. And I think that's very important, really, to tell young people that, remind people that the nature of orthodoxy is always to deny or explain away what it can't or it doesn't wish to explain, to understand. And that was the case of synesthesia. That's the case of many things. I think I sent you I think from the New York Times Sunday article this time about a woman she's a hyperosmotic. She can smell things, and she can smell Parkinson's disease years before it's diagnosed. And of course, she was poo-pooed. Oh, no, this is ridiculous. No, it can't possibly be real. And of course, after the people she was targeting were proved to have Parkinson's disease, like these critics were silenced. So that's another example of, the orthodoxy being told to shut up and not be so certain of what you think is true, but to have an open mind as to what might be, because what might be is far more exciting than this rigid certainty of what we think we know. Our knowledge is very, very fluid. And this is the beauty of being a scientist. It's perfectly fine to be wrong. I've been wrong. And I remember somebody telling me, oh my God, he was so impressed that I admitted that I was wrong. It's like, well, when you're wrong, it just means that you're not barking up the right tree. So you've got to go look elsewhere. And that's the beauty of science, is that if you're wrong, you can go move elsewhere and look at something else.
Yes, thank you. And I think we can apply that, to anything in our life, right?
I think so too, is that, the ability, I think the ability to admit that you're wrong is one of the most liberating things a person can do. You've had an argument with somebody, whatever it could be, and then you realize, oh no, I was mistaken. But do you have the humility to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, I apologize? And to say that is so liberating, and there's nothing wrong with being wrong. Own it.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you so much for all the advice and lecture and sharing your insights and so on. And
I don't know how useful that is. You said you wanted my philosophy of science. I don't know if I have a philosophy of science. It's just that I don't know. I'm a mad dog with a bone in my jaw, and I just have kept on going, following the beat of my own drummer. And I would suggest that young people do the same thing too. And you will either be proven right or you'll be proven wrong. But if you feel in your heart that you're on to something, then you should stick with it and pursue it and see where it goes. Because if you're wrong, there's nothing lost. You haven't lost a thing. If you're right, then you should feel enormously gratified. And that's just how science goes. It is what it is.
Totally, yes. 100% agree. So, yes. And yeah, thank you so much for joining today. And
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
You know, I've got this book coming out. As MIT Press is going to be out October 1st. And I'm really looking for a young, savvy person to help me with social media, because I used to write computer programs and I was very proud of being able to do so. But today, social media has changed so fast, so rapidly, that I just don't know what to do. So if you have any suggestions or people who might like to help me with promoting my new book on social media, I would be more than happy to hear from that.
Also, I have book. So this is Japanese
Oh,
edition.
that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
in Japanese.
The Japanese version. You know, I was invited to the Aroma Science Foundation in Tokyo. Oh, I had a wonderful time doing that. It was so, oh, that was great. Yeah. And so I gave a talk in Tokyo, and then we went to Kyoto, and I gave another talk at the Science Village there. I had a great time. I came home with lots of incense, by the way. So Kyoto incense, yeah. Well, thank you for that. I'm so I haven't seen that cover in years. So thank you. Yeah. And how does it translate as? Because I was told in Tokyo that it was called The Surprising Something or Other.
Yeah, sorry, this in English edition, but this is translation should be perfect. So I can see like any strange points. So it's totally makes sense. I can understand what you're talking in the book.
So how does the title translate in English?
Uprising for daily life of Synesthesia.
Surprising, right? Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, original title is The Man Who Tasted Shapes, but so
Yeah,
uprising
but you
daily
know,
life.
it's always amazing how different in German, it's quite different in Italian and Korean. So it's always interesting to see how different languages translate the title.
Yeah.
Oh, meaning like each company's publisher decide what the title goes.
Oh, yes, they do. All right. Yeah. So it's never a literal quote, The Man Who Tasted Shapes. It's always whatever they decide on. And it's amazing to see, like in German, it's Farbeschmecken Turnerhörnen, which is hearing, tasting shapes, hearing colors.
That makes, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I speak German, so that's the only one I really understand. So.
Yeah, but I love your book. So yeah, this is, I love this like scientific approach. So yeah, you came up with like, question first year, and so now you are interested in synthesis, then so you are trying to find a clue. So what is happening?
Well, I'm also interested in art, because my father was a physician, my mother was an artist. His father was a technical glass blower at RCA, who also made these beautiful glass sculptures. whereas my mother's father was a botanist and a farmer. So I had these two, I had 1 foot in science, 1 foot in art. And I, as a child, so to me as a child, like there was no difference between the two. It was like, this is what our family is. And so synesthesia as an artistic thing, sure, that spoke to me. As a scientific thing, it spoke to me. Yeah, and I still say that way again. I'm very blessed at being many times recipient of an artist fellowship from the DC Commission of Arts and Humanities here. And these are not project-based, they're merit-based, so they must like what I do because they keep giving me money. So so I'm grateful. And I keep writing. And right now I'm writing I'm collaborating with an old classmate of mine from American University, where I got my Master of Creative Arts in creative writing, Master of Fine Arts in creative writing. And we're writing a murder suspense thriller called What She Saw. So I'm always doing something. And I think this is what keeps people going. It keeps people alive, is that every day I wake up with a sense of purpose and think, oh, I'm awake. Yes, let's go. Let's get at it. You know, there's something to do. It's wonderful. I don't know how anybody could ever say that they're bored. I don't understand people who say they're bored, because there's so many things to do every day. The world is full of endless possibilities. So yes, you may count me as an optimist at heart. The glass is always half full, if not more full.
The curiosity, let your curiosity go, right? And
I'm highly
you,
curious. Yeah. And I inherit that from my mother, I think. Yeah. She was very, very, everything was always the best, the most wonderful, etc. Nothing was ever blah. It was always the best, this, that, and the other, no matter what she was doing. And I think that's a gift, to be able to see the possibility in every circumstance, rather than to be sour and turn it down.
I think so too, yes.
Yeah. So I'm glad for my inheritance. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so
All right,
much.
then I won't keep you any longer. Thank you so much, the two of you. I enjoyed talking with you. Thank you for inviting me to chat with you. And I hope this was useful.
It was.
So I'm getting into this bowing habit. So yes.
Very Japanese.
This is Japanese.
Very Japanese. Yes, I know. People bow on the phone. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I think it's beautiful. I think it's a beautiful habit. So thank you. Arigato.
Yeah.
Arigato.
Arigato.
Bye.
Bye.